We are talking The Oracle, and this one stars Ryan Destiny and Heather Graham. Think Get Out if it was a haunted house movie. So the movie focuses on this character called Shay, played by Ryan Destiny, who is some type of student studying kind of African American studies, and she's looking for a job. And Heather Graham comes a knocking, and Heather Graham's character is an ancestor of slave owners who own this kind of large kind of plantation, and she wants the character of Shay to look after her children while she is kind of dealing with a family emergency. Now, Shay is a little bit kind of unwilling to do this at first of all, because obviously going to this kind of plantation obviously has, you know, racial kind of connotations, and there's various kind of paraphernalia and things around the house that, you know, kind of set off Shay, you might say. But nonetheless, she kind of agrees. But while she is there looking after these children, there is a dark presence, an evil presence who has its own kind of like racial prejudices, you might say, and has a particular interest in Shay. Now, what will happen, you will have to watch the movie and find out. So let us discuss what I think works in The Oracle. Now, I will say it does play a little bit like a somewhat typical haunted house movie, just with these kind of like these racial kind of overtones to it. But that being said, I have to say there are some genuinely kind of like spooky sequences in it. One thing I found really effective, you see it a couple of times. You have these kind of like on this kind of plantation, there's this kind of long sort of plants, I'm guessing whatever they were growing there, and with this kind of tall grass, and we see these kind of like misty figures kind of walking around in the kind of the grass and things. I thought it's very effective and kind of very spooky and eerie. And when we have, you know, we go into this house, we have this ghostly kind of primary antagonist, and again, I think it's got done. And to a good standard, and looks spooky. There's some good set pieces where we just see this kind of like this dark figure kind of like lurking around and kind of coming out and kind of floating across kind of the hallways and things like this. I thought it was really effective, and I think having this kind of like this big old kind of plantation kind of style house, which obviously has this history of kind of violence and things like that, really does make a good setting for a kind of haunted house movie. So I think this movie genuinely has this kind of like this eerie kind of atmosphere and kind of setting that I think actually does benefit the movie quite a lot. I think the acting is quite solid actually. You'll recognise one of the kids from Ryan from The Boys if you watch that show, and he's actually looks like he's got a twin brother. But I think the acting is solid. I mean, Heather Graham's a seasoned pro at this point. She doesn't have a huge role. But the acting is solid. I thought everyone did a pretty good job here. I mean, the characterization's a little weaker. We'll come on to that, but you know, it's fine. The acting is absolutely, you know, no problems at all. The movie has a slick, polished look to it. It looks like it has a reasonable kind of production value behind it. And the VFX look kind of like tidy and kind of well produced, and I have to say, again, kind of quite haunting. And the movie just has a familiarity in some ways, because it is a little bit of a kind of somewhat generic haunted house movie, complete with red shirts and things like that. But nonetheless, you know, you feel like you pretty much get what you're going to expect with this film. It's not much in the way of surprises, but I think if you want a, you know, relatively kind of well produced, you know, haunted house movie, you know, you'll get it with this film. And obviously you have that kind of those racial elements as well, which you know, could help or hinder the movie depending on your point of view and that sort of stuff, I suppose. You know, obviously it adds that extra element of tension and kind of drama, I suppose, where the character of Shay's already uncomfortable in this place before there's even anything supernatural happening at all. And, you know, it's a stark reminder of obviously that the American past and kind of things like that. So, you know, it's a fairly effective kind of chiller, well made, well acted, with some kind of spooky moments. What doesn't work, for me, the beginning of this movie is extraordinarily contrived. how our character of Shay is just happens to need a job, but she can't find it. Heather Graham's character is just happens to find her, and she appears to have a personal connection to this kind of like this property, even though, you know, it was nothing, she'd never heard of it before, things like this. And there's a lot of contrivances in the story here. I don't want to spoil necessarily, spell it out for you, but there's a lot of contrivances, in particular the kind of the setup of this movie. I think the first act is quite weak. The characterization is quite broad. Like I said, I think the acting is fine, but, you know, some of the characterizations, again, they just seem a little bit kind of like, well, that's a little bit convenient at times, you know. And we have a couple of, as I said, I've mentioned kind of red shirts, secondary characters who, oh, we need someone to get, you know, have bad things happen to them, and we can't have it to the kind of the primary character. So we have a couple of red shirts that, you know, will be victims of stuff. You know, again, it's pretty typical. As the kind of the film progresses, there's a couple of things that happen in the movie. Some to do with physics that I thought weren't really kind of relevant. Others to do with kind of story beats. There's these two twin boys, one of which happens to be sort of more in tune with what's going on and can see things, whilst the other one can't. I'm thinking, why? Why can he see it and the other one can't? And it's never really explained. So there's just things that are kind of introduced that I feel aren't particularly kind of like, you know, well kind of conceived or executed when we kind of get it on screen. There's a couple of instances where I feel, again, you could just guess what's going to happen. It's fairly obvious. I mean, like I've said, the movie feels, it's kind of like a film where you think, you know what you're going to get, which is fine if you just want a bit of familiarity. I mean, it has that kind of like that more of the racial advertising, which is, you know, that you don't see as much, but as a kind of nuts and bolts haunted house film, it kind of plays very much like you think, but it ultimately makes it somewhat of a predictable movie in a lot of ways as well. You can kind of guess the ending. You can guess what will happen to some particular kind of characters and things like this. There's not really an attempt. There is a little bit of a misdirect, as I won't spoil for you clearly, but, you know, there's not a lot of that. And like I said, I think the script here is probably the weakest part. There are some things here that just didn't really make sense to me, but it looks good. I think it's, you know, it's well put together on a kind of a technical level, and the cast I think do an okay job, which to me it makes an entertaining watch at the very least, even though I think it's somewhat flawed and obvious, and really somewhat uninspired ultimately. But it's still a, you know, a watchable film. I'll give it a 6 out of 10 because I do feel there's some value to be had in entertainment value, and there's some spooky sequences that I genuinely feel do elevate this movie a little bit. So it's a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.